Welcome to this YSL Excel VBA tutorial. This video covers web scraping across multiple pages, and it's a direct follow-on from the previous video, which showed you how to do the same thing with just a single page. So as the name suggests, we're going to look at scraping multiple web pages in a single procedure. It helps if you've seen the previous video, but we'll give you enough information to follow along with this one, even if you haven't. So we'll start with a really quick recap of the HTML and XML object libraries and how to reference those, and then how to generate HTTP requests and create new HTML documents from the results. We'll look at using a web browser to inspect HTML elements, just to help you to work out what it is you need to process. And then we'll talk about writing code to refer to those HTML elements, either by class name or by tag name. We'll then look at a couple of techniques that allow you to loop over those collections of HTML elements before we finally start concatenating URLs and looping over multiple pages. The final part of the video is going to cover how you can write out the useful data to some worksheets in Excel, which is really the scraping part of web scraping. For a final flourish, we'll then add some hyperlinks back to the source data, just so you've got some kind of useful information to work with as a final result. So it's quite a long detailed video, hope you're up for it. Let's get started. Let me start by explaining the example we're going to create in this video. So here's a web page you might be familiar with already. It's the YSL homepage, of course. From the top menu bar, I can choose from the resources section videos, and that takes me to a list of all the videos we've ever produced. So they're the same as the videos we've got uploaded to YouTube, of course. They're just embedded on these YSL pages. And on the YSL site, we've got the videos organised by category. So you can see down the list on the left-hand side, there's various different categories showing videos of different types. So if I clicked on the Excel VBA category, that takes me to a page showing me the first 20 Excel VBA videos. Now each video is represented by one of these little grey boxes, and there are details included in there like the title and the author and the description. And of course some video categories are so large that not all the videos fit onto a single page, so there are some paging controls down at the bottom. So what this video is going to show you how to do is write a system that is going to scroll through all of the individual video categories in this list, and it's going to go to each one in turn, it's going to go to each page for that category in turn, and then write out a row in a worksheet showing information about the video. So we'll have a separate worksheet for each category. The starting point for all this is, it's a blank Excel workbook. So if I head into Excel, I've got a brand new blank Excel workbook. I've already saved it as a macro-enabled workbook, so that means I can just head straight to the Developer tab, head to the Visual Basic Editor, and here's the starting point. We'll need a new module, of course, so let's insert that now. I can right-click and choose Insert Module, and I'm not going to bother renaming it. Before I start writing any code, I'm going to reference a couple of object libraries. These are ones that we covered in the previous video, so I won't go into too much detail here. So I'm going to go to the Tools menu, choose References, and then I'm going to scroll down first of all and find the Microsoft HTML object library. So I'm going to ignore the Microsoft Internet Controls library in this video. Yes, in the previous video we looked at using Internet Explorer. Just for efficiency reasons, I'm not going to use Internet Explorer in this example. We're just going to find the Microsoft HTML controls. So HTML object library. The way that we're going to connect to the website itself is using Microsoft XML. So there's a Microsoft XML library in here somewhere. There's a few of them, in fact. I'm just going to go for the latest one that's installed on my machine. So that's Microsoft XML version 6.0. That allows us to make HTTP requests without having to use a web browser, which makes life it makes the code much more efficient. It means it doesn't have to deal with opening up the web browser and all the complexities of controlling that other application. Now we can start writing a subroutine. So let's create a new sub. I'm going to call mine something like Get Video Page. And what this one is going to do is send an HTTP request to the YSL video homepage, and then return the HTML and generate a new HTML document from that. So we're going to need a couple of variables to achieve that. Let's declare our first one. I'm going to call mine XML rec, or short for request, as a new. So it's going to be an auto-instancing variable, MSXML2, so that's the name of one of the libraries we just referenced, and then an XML HTTP, in my case 60, so it's got the numbers 60 or 60 after it because it's version 6.0. It may well be that if you've referenced a different version of the library, if you didn't have version 6.0 on your machine, that could easily be 50, or it could just be XML HTTP, but in my case it's definitely 60. We'll also need somewhere to store the document that we create. So let's have another variable. I'm going to call mine HTML doc as a new, so again another auto-instancing variable, mshtml dot HTML document. Next we can open up our new HTTP request. So to do that I'm going to say xml_rec.open. And there are several parameters I need to fill in. So the first one I've got to fill in is the method I'm going to apply, which in this case is get. The second parameter is the URL I want to get the information from. So in this case in fact I'm just going to go and copy and paste that from the Wisal page. So I'm just going to browse back to the video's home page and then just copy the URL from the address bar just to avoid typing it in. The last thing I'm going to do is fill in the third parameter, which is technically an optional parameter, but I'm going to make sure that this request doesn't run asynchronously, so it runs synchronously. Essentially that means it's going to wait for a response before it proceeds with the rest of the code. Once we've filled all those details in, we can send the request. So again I can say xml_rec.send. The next thing I'd quickly like to be able to do is check that the request has succeeded, and we can do that by checking the status. So let's say if xml_rec.status status is not equal to the number 200. So that indicates that the request has succeeded and we've browsed to a page. Well, not browsed to it, but we've returned a page. So if that condition is not true, or if the status is not 200, then I'm going to print out a simple message box. So let's say message box. I'm just going to print out a simple message that says problem, and then I'm going to concatenate to that a VB new line character. And then I'm going to print out the xml_rec.status, so we'll see what number the status actually is. And then I think it would also be helpful to have the status text as well, just so we can see what's actually going on. So xml_rec.status text. We'll make sure that we exit the subroutine at that point, so we don't just carry on blindly if we haven't succeeded to return the page that we were looking for, and then we'll have an end if to finish off the block if. At that point it's probably worthwhile just quickly testing that the request succeeds. So with the correctly formed URL, let's just try to run that one. We shouldn't see anything happen at that point. It should just run and no problems reported. If we had a slightly malformed URL, so we said something like video rather than videos, and then we executed that again, this time we're going to see a problem. It's a dreaded 404 error, so the web page was not found. So if I click OK, that tells me that I haven't successfully returned the request, and then the subroutine just ends. So let's switch that back to videos and make sure that it is going to work, and then let's carry on and actually get the HTML document. Generating the new document is pretty straightforward. All we're going to do is say html_doc.body.inner_html, and we're going to make that equal to the response text from the XML request, so xml_rec.response text. So what that will do is generate a brand new HTML document formed of the text sent back via our HTTP request. At that point, what we then need to do is start thinking about how we process the individual items on the page, and the best way to start with that is to have a quick look at inspecting elements on the web page. Now, we used this technique a lot in the previous video to find out what items we had on the web page to work with. So I've got the Wisal video page open up in Internet Explorer, but you can also use Google Chrome or Firefox or Safari, whichever browser you happen to use, the same technique will work. I'd like to find out some information about these video categories first of all. So all I'm going to do is right click on any one of them and choose Inspect Element. And what that should do is open up the Document Object Model Explorer and highlight the exact bit of code that's been used to generate that single specific item. So what this is telling me is that the particular item that I've clicked on has a tag of A, which represents a hyperlink, with an attribute called href, which is the link itself, and some inner text. It's also a member of a list item tag, so you can see li there, who's got a unique class attribute, which is wo menu item. That's all part of a UL, an unsorted list, which is part of a div tag. So I've got a variety of ways that I could start to get access to these individual items. In the previous video we looked quite a lot at getting items or getting a reference to a set of elements by their tag names. We use things like a and div and so on to get a list of items by their tag. What we're going to do in this video a little bit more is use the class names. So that's a technique we didn't see in the previous video. So in this case I can see that each of the items in this list has got a unique class of wo menu item. So my first job is to get a reference to all of those items using that class name. So I'm going to head back into the VB editor and I'm going to start by declaring a couple of variables to help me out with this. I'll call the first variable something like vidcats, short for video categories, and the type of that will be an ms.html.ihtml element collection. So that's of course just a collection of elements from the HTML document. To set a reference to that, what I'm going to do is, after I've got a reference to the document itself, once that's been created, I'm going to say set vidcats equals html.doc dot. Then there's a method of the HTML document called getElementsByClassName. So yesterday we looked at getting elements by ID, we got a look at getting elements by tag name. In this video we're going to have a quick look at how to get elements by class name. So if I say get elements by class name, open up some parentheses and some double quotes, then the name of the class was WO menu item. And if I close the double quotes and close the parentheses, that now stores a list of all of the elements with that specific class name. Just as we're going along and testing our code, it would be useful to print out some information about the various elements we're getting access to. So I could say debug.print vidcats.length, just to find out how many items are actually in the collection. And if I display the immediate window by pressing Ctrl and G, and then just execute the subroutine at that point, I'll find that there are 19 elements in that collection. If I want to find out any information about the individual items in the collection, I can loop over the vidcats element collection, and I can do that in a couple of different ways. A nice convenient way to do it is actually using a for each loop, in which case I'll need another new variable. So I'm going to say dim vidcat, representing a single category, as an ms.html.ihtml element. So having done that, I can scroll back down, and then after I've printed out the length of the collection, I can say for each vidcat in vidcats, and then next vidcat, and then I can think about what information I would like to print out about each individual video category. For each of these elements then, what I'd like to be able to see is the type of tag that it is. So I'm going to say debug.print vidcat.tagname. And I'd also like to see the inner text property, so vidcat.innerText. Having done that, I'm just going to run the subroutine again by pressing F5, and this time I'm going to see a whole range of different values printed out into the immediate window. If we have a quick look at what's in the immediate window, then you can see that essentially everything that's been printed out is a list item tag, and you'll see the various different names of the items there, the inner text. So you can see that some of them correspond to video categories, but it also some of them correspond to the video authors as well, and then a little bit further down they can correspond to the years in which the videos were published. So just going back to Internet Explorer and having a look at what we've got here, we're seeing not just videos by category, but we're also getting access to the authors and years, which is something that I don't want to do. So I'd like to look at how we can sort of change that. So rather than looking at all of the WYSAL menu items, the problem that we've got here, of course, is that these things correspond to the same class, so they have the same class WO menu item. If I expand this class menu title inside the DOM Explorer, I'll find another menu list, and then inside there another unsorted list with items in there whose class is WO menu item, and they correspond to the authors, and then another one further down for the years. What I'd like to do is prevent that from happening. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to look for items in the page, first of all, whose class is WO menu list. Now there are several of these in the page already, so you can see that there's a menu list for the authors and a menu list for the years as well. We can guarantee that on this page the first item whose class is menu list is the one that contains the video categories. So my first job is to get a reference to an element whose class is WO menu list and make sure that it's the first element in the page with that class. So let's head back to the VB editor and let's think about how we can do that. I'll start by declaring another variable which is going to hold the video category list. Let's just add that one just above the vidcats. So I'm going to say dim vidcat list as an ms.html.ihtml element. So it's not an element collection, it's just going to refer to a single element in the page. Before I set my vidcats reference then, I'm going to say set vidcat list equals HTML doc dot get elements by class name, open some round brackets, and then the particular class name that I'm looking for this time is WO menu list rather than menu item. Now currently this line of code is going to try to get a reference to a collection of elements, which is no good because I haven't declared the variable as an element collection, it's just a single element. I'd like to return just the first item that belongs to the collection of elements returned by this method. So to do that I can kind of almost cheat at the end and open a new set of parentheses and refer to the first item in the collection. Now the element collections are indexed from 0, so the first item has an index number of 0. So having done that, that'll give me a reference to just that single individual menu item or menu list for the video categories. What I can now do is attempt to get just the individual video categories from the category list. So one approach that you might think about trying in order to do that would be to try to use the get elements by class name, not for the HTML document, but for the vidCatList element. So if I say vidCatList, get elements by class name, that will appear to make sense. But if I try to run that one at this point, it's going to fall over. If I click the debug button, it falls over on the line that I've just modified. I can't use the get elements by class name method on another HTML element. This method is only applicable to the HTML document. Now, fortunately for us, there are other techniques we can use to make this work, so I'm just going to stop running the code at this point. And then instead of trying to get elements by class name, what I'm just going to do is refer to the property of an HTML element called children, so vidCatList.children. So children refers to the element collection, which are all the direct descendants of that particular element in the HTML code. So in our case, if I can find it in here reasonably quickly, this first WO menu list has a range of direct descendants here, which are all list items. So if I were to go back to my VB editor now, and I'm just going to clear the contents of the immediate window, click into it, press Ctrl A and then delete, and then click back into my code and hit F5 to run it, I'll find that I've now got a list of just the video categories and not authors or years. Now what I've just done here leaves me with another tiny little problem, because it wasn't actually the list items that I was interested in getting a reference to. These are the direct children of the video category list, but if I go back to the DOM Explorer here, it's not the list items that I'm interested in, it's the children of the list items, so effectively it's the grandchildren of our YSL menu list. It's the A tag, it's the hyperlinks that I'm really interested in, because these are the ones that hold the URL that I'd like to browse to next, as well as a sensible name for the category and an indication of how many videos there are. So rather than getting access to the children of my unsorted list, what I'm going to do instead is refer to just the A tags inside that item. So, going back to our VB code again, rather than saying vidCatList.children, I'm going to say vidCatList.get elements by tag name. Now at this point you're thinking, hang on, your IntelliSense doesn't show that. Are you going to run into the same problem that you ran into earlier on by getting elements by class name? Fortunately not. The IntelliSense is a little bit misleading here. Although you can only apply the get elements by class name method to an HTML document, you can apply the get elements by tag name method to any HTML element, whether that's an entire document or any other individual element. So what I can then do is open up some parentheses then and some double quotes, and then look for A tags, and then close the double quotes and close the parentheses. And then what I'm going to do is click back into the immediate window and hit Ctrl A and delete, and then I'm going to run the subroutine one more time just to see what I now get. Okay, so the immediate window here shows me that I'm definitely just getting the A tags, and I'm showing that the inner text is the same as it was before, so it's the video category names, and I'm still not getting the authors or the years, which are things that I didn't want. So what I can do now is make sure that I get the href attribute. So I'm not bothered about printing out the tag name anymore. Let me just get rid of that at that point. What I really want to do is get the href attribute. So after vidcat.innerText, I'm going to type in a comma, and then I'm going to say vidcat.getAttribute. So this allows me to refer to any attribute of a tag. So these are the items, if I just switch back briefly to the DOM Explorer, these are the items in this particular browser are displayed in red text here. So these are things like class and href, etc. So back into the VB editor, the particular attribute that I'm after here is href, and if I close the double quotes and close the parentheses, clear the immediate window one more time, and then run the subroutine one more time, I'll now get the URLs of the various video categories. Now I do just have one final problem with the range of items that I'm looping over, and that's to do with the very top item in the list. It's the video's homepage. I've already browsed to the video's homepage with the very first request that I opened, and I don't want to browse to the homepage again, so I want to eliminate this item from the list. One way to do that, I suppose, would be to use an if statement somewhere inside our for each loop and say if that was the video's homepage, then ignore it and move on to the next one instead. But it's slightly more elegant, I think, if we eliminate that one from the loop altogether. Now sadly I can't do that with a for each loop. What I need to do is change this into some other kind of loop, so I'm going to use a for next loop to do that. To use a for next loop, I'm going to need to declare some kind of number variable, a counter variable that allows me to count through the individual items. So I'm going to declare a variable called vidCatID as an integer. Now if I wanted to use this type of loop to process the video categories, I could say, instead of for each vidcat, I could say for vidCatID equals, and then type in the value for the lowest number I want to start looping at. So if I was going to loop over the entire collection, if I wanted to process all 12 items in the collection, I would say 0, because as we saw earlier on, the indexing of element collections begins at 0. And then rather than in, I would say to vidcats.length minus 1. If I could spell length properly, that would help. So vidcats.length minus 1. So what that would do is loop 12 times and print out the information about each video category, or it would at least if I'd actually set a reference to the vidcat. So what I would do inside the loop then, as well, I need to change the next statement to a next vidcat ID, and then the first thing I could do inside the loop is say set vidcat, so this is the actual HTML element variable, equal to vidcats, open some parentheses, and then say vidCatID. So that will use the number that the variable is currently holding each time through the loop. So having done all that, if I just clear out the contents of the immediate window again, and then if I run that one, we'll see we once again get all 12 items. Now having done this, this is much easier to eliminate one of my items from my list. If I know that the video's homepage is element number 0, all I need to do to make this work is begin my loop at 1 instead. So one last time, if I just clear the contents of the immediate window, run the subroutine one more time, this time we should find that I only get 11 elements. There's still a count of 12, of course. The count won't have changed, the length of the element collection, but I've eliminated the video's homepage from the list, so I'm only actually printing out 11 of those. What I need to start thinking about doing now is converting each of the href attribute values into a proper fully formed URL, so a little bit more like what we've put in earlier on to open up the HTTP request in the first place. So essentially I need to concatenate this part of the URL with this part of what the href attribute returns to create a complete fully formed URL. To help us out with that, I'm going to declare a couple of extra variables and a constant as well. We're going to be referencing our YSL videos homepage quite a lot, so scrolling right up to the top of the module, I'm going to declare a constant which is going to be called something like wall vid URL as a string, and I'm going to make it equal to what I've already typed in. So in fact I'm just going to cheat and copy and paste, or in fact cut and paste this one. I'm going to cut that out and paste it in to the constant's value. What I can now do is just modify my open method by referring to wall vid URL. So that makes that code a little bit tidier. I'm also going to need to declare a couple of extra variables for handling each of the individual href attributes. I don't necessarily need both of these variables, but it will just make life easier to break down the individual steps of what we're about to do. So I'm going to declare something like dim next href as string, and dim next URL as string, and I'll put a capital L on that as well. And then I can go back down to my for next loop and work out how to construct a fully formed URL out of what we've got so far. So I'm just going to start by giving myself a bit of space in between the setVidCat line and the debug.print line. And what I'm going to do next is say next href equals, and then I'm just going to pick out the href attribute from the vidcat, so I can just copy and paste that from the debug.print statement. This will just make it easier for the next line of code where I'm going to try to concatenate everything together but extract a part of the value of the href. So I'm going to say next URL equals, we've got the wall vid URL, and I want to concatenate that with the result of the mid function. So you might have used this in previous videos. The mid function allows you to extract bits of text from a longer string. So there are several parameters here. The first thing you've got to specify is what string of text you're getting your values from. So I've got that stored currently in next href, which just makes my life a little bit easier. I don't have to refer to vidcat get attribute href. Then I need to say which character position to start at. Now the bit that represents the useful part for me is everything after the videos / So I've got to get to the part where I've found where the start of the actual category begins. So that's everything after the videos and the / there. There are several ways I could actually make this work. I think one reasonably consistent way to do this, I guess, for the way the WiseOwl webpage is set up, we know we can identify the colon character fairly easily in the string and find out its position. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then from there we know that it's going to be followed by a / the word videos, and another /. So from position number 6 I can count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 characters from there. So if I wanted to do it that way, what I'd need to do is establish how I could find the colon character inside the string. So to do that I'm going to use the inString function, or instr as it's actually spelt, so instr. Then I can open up some round brackets. Now I've got an optional parameter to start with, the start position. That's just going to begin at position number 1 if I don't specify otherwise. So in fact I can just jump straight to next href followed by a comma, and I'm looking for inside there a colon character, and then I can close the parentheses for that. So that will return the number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Then I said that I wanted to add 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 characters to that. So I can say +9 and then close the parentheses, and that should return the correct URL. Just to give that a quick test, what we're going to do is debug.print, not vidcat inner text and the href. I'm going to say vidcat.innerText, comma, next URL. Excuse me, next URL. I'll spell that properly eventually. There it is. Having done that, I'm going to clear the contents of the immediate window and then just run this one more time, just to have a quick look at what we actually get. So that's all looking reasonably good. So we've got all the various video categories with nicely formed URLs at this point, and we're essentially ready to go now and start browsing to those category pages. Now because this subroutine is getting quite long and unwieldy already, I'm going to separate out the next part into a different procedure, into which we can pass some useful information. So we're going to pass in the inner text as the video category name and the URL that we've just constructed. So that means that I need to declare a new subroutine. So let's just go back to the code down below our previous end sub, and I'm going to create a new one here called sub list videos on page. And what I'm going to do there is declare two separate parameters. So the first one is going to be called, I'm going to call it vidcat name as string, followed by a comma, and then I'm also going to say vidcat URL as well. So let's call this one vidcat URL, also as a string. If I close the parentheses at that point and hit enter a couple of times, essentially what I'm going to do next is, rather than debug.print the inner text and the next URL, I'm simply going to make a call to my list videos on page procedure. So let's just get rid of that debug.print statement and instead say list videos on page. If I typed in the space there just to see the little tooltip pop up, we're passing the inner text as the category name and the next URL as the video category URL. Now the first part of this procedure is actually very similar to what we did to start our original procedure. So just scrolling back up towards the top, I'm going to make one little addition to the code we've written in our first procedure. Once we've retrieved the response text from the HTML request, the HTTP request, there's absolutely no reason to keep that around. That object has done its job at that point. So currently it's going to be still available for the rest of the procedure, which we don't really want. So what I'm going to do there is just set XML_rec equals nothing, just to tidy up the code a little bit. What I'm then going to do is, again, just to cheat ever so slightly, is copy and paste a few bits of code from our original procedure. So let's have a quick look. I'm going to copy the two variables that refer to the HTTP request and the HTML document. We'll need both of those. I'll paste those back in down to the second procedure. I'll also need the code that tries to browse to or open up the new request. So I'm going to copy and paste the open and send, the little if statement that checks whether it returned success or not, and then the last two lines there that return the response text to generate the new document, and then ends the XML request or sets it to nothing. So let's just copy all of those lines and paste them in. And the one single thing that I need to change now is, rather than trying to browse to the wall vid URL, all I need to do is instead browse to the vid cat URL. So let's just copy and paste over the top of that, and that's the basics of the beginning of that new procedure. Okay, so just to see where we should be, imagining that we actually had this web browser open and we saw what pages we browsed to. So imagine I'd clicked on, or I'd gone to the first category, Excel VBA, and that would be the page that we'd be currently looking at. So the next job that I'd like to do is to list through or loop through all of the individual videos displayed on this page. So I'm just going to inspect the elements. I'm going to right click on this little grey box and choose Inspect Element, and then see what this is actually called. So we can see that that's actually an href, it's an A tag, it's a hyperlink tag with an href attribute, and that's going to be quite important to us. We'll need to pick that out to construct the URL. It's also got some inner text here which refers to the video name, so we're going to need to pick up the inner text here as well. You can see that it's part of a paragraph, a P tag, with a unique class name, WO Video List Default Series Title. It's also there part of a div tag with a class of WO Video List Row. So if I just collapse the P tag there, let's just have a look at what we've got. So we've got a class called Video List Row, which has 3 children, one of which has another child, which is an A tag, which has the actual values that we want. We've also got a second P tag which gives us information about, in this case it's the video author, so that you can see there's a link there to who authored the video and what date that was uploaded on or posted on, and then there's a final P tag there as well, which doesn't have any children, but it just describes or provides the description for the video. So that gives us a little bit of information as to what to work with. I think the approach we're going to take, as each video is represented essentially by one of these WO Video List Row classes, we're going to use the get elements by class name first to get a reference to all of those, and then within there I think what we will do is get all the child elements by tag name and look for the A tags. So that's the approach we'd like to try to take. Let's head back to the VB editor and try to put that into practice. Let's start by working out how to loop over the individual video rows first of all. So we'll have a couple of variables to do that. Let's say dim vid row as ms.html.ihtml element. Then we can say dim vid rows. So we're almost always constructing a singular and a plural of the same variable for these individual loops. So let's say ms.html.ihtml element collection. Okay, so with those two variables declared, what I'd like to do now, after we've successfully got the HTML document, I would like to loop over, first of all get a reference to the video rows using the get elements by class name. So I'm going to say down here set video rows, set vid rows equals HTML doc dot get elements by class name. We can use that here because you're allowed to apply this method to the entire document, just not to the individual elements. And the name of the class was WO Video List Row. I forgot to open up the set of double quotes there, and then close a parentheses at the end, and that will get us access to that collection of elements. The loop then is just the same as we did earlier on. It's a for each loop, so we can say for each vid row in vid rows, next vid row and then we can work out what sort of useful information we might want to print about that. Let's see, I'd like to print out, I think, how many children each video row element has. So let's have a debug.print statement that will say vidrow.children.length. Again, the IntelliSense kind of fails at that point, sadly, but we know that the children property returns an element collection, so that must then have the same properties and methods of an element collection, so we can refer to the length property. So having done that, I'm just going to clear the contents of the immediate window, and we know that we can't run this subroutine from within, well, we can't run it singly anymore because it has a couple of parameters. It requires values to be passed into it. We have to either call it from somewhere else, or we can also just run a subroutine that already calls it. So let's head back up to our first subroutine, click somewhere in there, and then run that one, and we'll get a pretty big long list of the number 3. And the reason we're getting a long list of the number 3, as well as the number 12, which is still the debug.print in the original subroutine up here somewhere, I think I'm going to just comment that out at this point, just to avoid confusion. The whole great big long list of number 3s is to do with the fact that, if we switch back into the Internet Explorer window and the DOM Explorer, we can see that each of our WO video list row class items contains 3 individual children. Okay, so having established that we can get access to each of these individual video boxes, let's work out what the useful bit of information will be. So inside each video list row, we've got 3 paragraph tags, one of which contains an href, an A tag with an href attribute containing the video's link, the URL. That's definitely an important piece of information. The inner text of that A tag as well contains some useful information. It's the name of the video. The other bits of information in the other P tags aren't really that useful. In this particular case, I'm not particularly interested in who posted the video or the link to that person's profile on the Wisel page or what date it was created. So I'm actually going to ignore that P tag, and I also don't care about the video's description either. All I really care about here is getting access to the URL of the video and the video's title. So that's contained within an A tag within the video list row. There is also another A tag, of course, the link to the video's author, which I don't care about. So what I'm going to do is get a reference to all of the elements by tag name with an A tag, and then just return the first element from that collection. So back to the VB editor, and we'll need to declare a new variable to help us out with that. I'm going to call this new variable something like vidLink, as an MS HTML, which I'm so getting bored of typing by this point, iHTML element. I'll get that spelled correctly. You would have thought I could have spelled that correctly the number of times I've typed it in so far. So that's just a single element, not an element collection. The technique that I'm going to use then, of course, back in the for each loop, is to say set vidLink equals vidrow dot get elements by, and again, you'll see that the IntelliSense fails at this point, but get elements by tag name, open some parentheses and some double quotes, the letter A, close the double quotes and the parentheses, and then open some more parentheses and refer to the first item in the collection, so the same thing that we did earlier on. Now, rather than printing out or debug.printing the length of the children collection, what I'm going to do instead, if I just move that statement down, is I'm going to print out vidLink dot inner text, which will hopefully show me the name of the video, followed by a comma, and then also something like vidLink dot get attribute, open some parentheses, href, close the double quotes and parentheses, and that should give us some actual useful information. Okay, so if I just clear the contents of the immediate window yet again, and scroll back up to the first subroutine in the page, and run that one again, this time I ought to see long lists of different videos from various different pages. So that looks pretty successful to me for the starting point. So you can see all the Excel VBA videos, or at least the first page of Excel VBA videos, and then the Excel Power BI videos, and then some more Power BI videos, and so on and so on, Excel VBA user forms. So we're definitely successfully getting different video categories. The problem that we've got left, and the one big one to solve, is how we get this to work for each individual page. So where there's a video category which has too many videos to display on a single page, how do we get around that issue? As always, the best way to start working out how to solve this sort of a problem is to inspect the HTML of the page. So let's head back to our web browser, which I still have open, and I'm already on a page which is page 1 of 3, so that should mean that if I scroll all the way to the bottom of the page, there should already be, eventually, when it catches up. Things go a little bit strange when I'm running my screen recording software. So here we go. So I've got some paging controls down at the bottom of this page. So I right click on any one of these and choose to inspect the element. I should see what that is made up of. And fortunately for us, someone's been very, very thoughtful and given these paging elements a sensible class name, WO paging item. And that means there should be 3 of those on the page. In this particular case, there's 3 different items, so indeed there they are in a list. So each list item in an unsorted or unordered list, there are A tags in there, but the great thing about this is they've got unique class names. Now we do have to be slightly careful about this because it's quite possible we could be on a video category which doesn't have any paging controls. So for instance, if there was, should I bother scrolling all the way back up to the top, if there was a video category with very few videos in it, so there's only one single video in there. That's my attempt at making a video game in Excel. See how far you can push Excel. It's quite good fun actually. So you can see there are no paging controls on this particular page. So we have to be slightly careful with exactly what code we write. Anyway, if I switch back to the Excel VBA category just so we've got something to reference again and just make sure we're happy with what the names of the paging controls are. Right click and inspect that element one more time. So that was a WO paging item. So back to the VB editor and let's work out what code now we need to add to get this part to work. Well, we should definitely start by declaring at least one new variable. This one's going to hold an element collection, so we're going to return all the elements by class name matching the one that we're just looking for, the paging controls. So let's say dim vid pages as ms.html dot ihtml element collection. To set a reference to that, what we're going to do is, once we've got the page loaded, and before we get the video rows, we're going to set a reference to the paging controls to work out how many pages we're going to be working with. So at that point I'm going to say set vid pages equals html.doc dot get elements by class name. There it is. Open some parentheses and some double quotes, and the name of the class was WO paging item. Spell that properly. That's quite important. Paging item. Okay, so there we go. So we've got a reference to all of the video pages elements. At this point, we should probably just loop over this collection to see what information we can obtain. So at this point, I'm actually going to just comment out the vid rows loop, and then let's declare another new variable somewhere up near our vid pages variable. I'm going to call this one dim, I'll just call it dim I as integer. So we're going to use a simple for next loop rather than for each loop in this case. You'll see why shortly. So what we're going to do is we're going to say for I equals 0 to vid pages dot length minus 1. Then we'll say next I, and what I'd like to be able to do is say debug.print vid pages open parentheses I close parentheses dot get attribute, and then open some more parentheses and some double quotes, and I'm going to say href, close the double quotes and close the parentheses. So at that point I'm just going to execute the subroutine from the first one, and then I should clear out the contents of the immediate window though first, and if I were to run this one this time, what I ought to find out is, there we go, there's all of the individual paging controls. So for Excel VBA we've got 3 pages, for SQL we've got 2 pages, for reporting services we've got 2, and it looks as though everything else has just got one single page. Now the way this loop works is going to cause us a couple of small problems, because essentially the next step is to shift this section of code here inside our for next loop. So in fact let's just do that right now. I'm going to move my next I statement down to below my next vid row statement, and then I'm just going to indent all those lines of code inside their one space. Now currently the way this is set up, this isn't going to handle, it's not going to deal with pages or categories where there's only one single page of videos. So if you imagine that we looked for vid pages, or we tried to set vid pages to all the paging items on a category that didn't have any paging items, that would mean that the length of the category would be 0, or sorry, the length of the vid pages collection would be 0. So if we subtract 1 from 0, of course we get -1, so you'd have a loop that was going to try to loop from 0 to -1. So unless you actually added in a separate step -1 statement, that loop wouldn't process categories where there was only one page. So to get around that small problem, first of all, what we're going to do is add an if function. So rather than always subtracting 1, we're going to subtract if. So you may not have used this previously in VBA. It's exactly the same as the Excel worksheet function, it's just it's spelled with 2 i's rather than just a single one. So I believe that makes the pronunciation if rather than just if. But anyway, if vidpages.length is greater than 0, followed by a comma, then I'd like to subtract 1, followed by another comma, otherwise I'd just like to subtract 0. So this will always loop from at least 0 to 0, so the loop will always process once for every category of videos. This debug.print statement is not much good here either. If we're referencing an item in the vid pages collection, well, that collection only exists if the page or the category has paging controls in it. So if I try to print that for, let's say, the C# video series where there's only one page of videos, then that would fail miserably because there is no item to reference. In addition to that, we don't want to reference the first page of our multi-page categories anyway, because we're actually already on that page. If we had this bit of code reactivated again uncommented, then we'd already be looking at this first page. So I only want to make this work for items where the length of vid pages is greater than 0, or effectively for where I is greater than 0. So let's add in another if statement. This time not an if function, an if statement. We're going to say if I equals, or beg pardon, I is greater than 0, then we're going to do a whole bunch of things to make sure we generate and process every single page in all the paged items. So let's just add in the end if, and then we'll work out what extra code we need to add in to make this part work. The approach we're going to take here is pretty much identical to the one that we used to generate the URLs for each video category. So in fact, let's scroll back up to our previous procedure, and we've got a couple of variables in there, next href and next URL, which I'm just going to steal and pop back into this procedure. We've also got a couple of lines of code that work out how to generate the next href and next URL. So let me just copy and paste those two lines from the first procedure. We'll need to adapt them ever so slightly, but I'm going to copy and paste those inside the if statement that we've just written. So if I just pop those in, I'll need to make a couple of small changes to the code we've just stolen. So of course we're not referencing the video category anymore, I'm referencing vid pages I. So I'm going to copy and paste that over the top of vidcat. The next thing we need to do is make sure that we're not printing out the href attribute anymore. I want to check that I am indeed printing out the value of the next URL. So let's first of all move the debug.print statement down and then just tidy up the code a little bit, get rid of some extra blank lines that we don't need. And then rather than printing out the href attribute, let's print out the next URL. Okay, so just to make sure that we are actually generating the URLs correctly for each page in the categories with multiple pages, let's scroll back up to the first subroutine one more time and give that one a quick little test. So there we go, it looks pretty successful to me. We've got some nicely formed URLs pointing to each of the individual pages for the categories that have multiple pages. Now of course just printing the URL isn't particularly useful. What we want to do next is take that URL and send a request, an HTTP request, and get access to an HTML document so that we can process all the video rows on that page. So to do that, again, we can just essentially copy and paste from, in fact in this case, from the existing subroutine. So let's get everything from xmlrec.open. We can copy that and we'll have the little if statement that determines whether it's succeeded or not, and we'll get the inner HTML and set xmlrec equals nothing. I'm just going to copy all of those lines, and then inside the if statement, just below where I've printed out the next URL, I'm going to paste all that in. I'm going to do a little bit of tidying up with the indenting, otherwise I'm not going to sleep tonight if I leave it looking like that. We also need to make sure that we're not getting the video category URL this time, and getting the next URL. So I'm going to cut and paste or copy and paste that, and then I'm going to remove or at least comment out that debug.print statement. Okay, so at this point the core part of the code is pretty much there. If I can just uncomment the video rows section that we commented out earlier on, this is still doing the same job as previously. It's just working with whichever HTML document is provided to print out the individual details for each video in all the video rows. The cool thing that we've done now at this point is we've added in code that will change which HTML document it's pointing to based on whether the page has, whether the category of videos has multiple pages or not. Also, of course, we had in the code earlier on from our first subroutine which changes the page for each category. So all that remains at this point is just to give this a little bit of quick test. Let's just clear the immediate window one more time, and I'm going to click into the first subroutine and then just run the entire thing and see what we get. So that's looking pretty successful. Didn't take too long to carry out either, so let's just scroll up and see what we've actually got. So it looks like we've got Excel. I think we've just chopped off, there are too many videos printed out. There's something like, what is it, about 210, 213 videos altogether. So we've chopped off some of the videos at the top, but we've definitely got videos past Excel VBA part 20, so there were 20 videos per page if you remember. So we're getting all the VBA videos at this point and all these other ones, and then we've got all the Power BI videos, which is on a single page anyway, and then we should also have the VBA forms videos, and we've got all of those. There were fewer than 20 of those anyway. SQL queries, again there were fewer than 20 of those. SQL programming, and there were fewer than 20 of those. SQL Server 2016, and reporting services. So reporting services should be one that's multi-page as well, so we've got more than 20 videos there. So that's looking pretty good. We're getting all the videos that we actually wanted, whether it was a single page or a multiple page, and from every single video category. So all that remains really is to work out how to get this useful information into some cells in the worksheets. So getting the new worksheet to be created for each video category is pretty straightforward. All we need to do is make sure that we create a new sheet before we start looping over the individual pages. So in the second subroutine, before we start looping over the pages, even maybe before we set the video pages, all we need to do is create a new worksheet. So we can say worksheets.add, and then I might want to set range A1 on that worksheet to be equal to the video category name. So let's say range A1.value equals vid.cat names. That was one of the two parameters we passed in earlier on. I'm then just going to, for convenience, set the selected cell to range A2 just to make life easy, and then we can think about how we can process or pass out the values that we're interested in inside the loop into the cells on the worksheet as well. So inside this for each loop that's looping through each of the video rows, rather than debug.printing things, all I'm going to do is change debug.print to ActiveCell.value equals vidlink.innerText. So that's going to give us the name of the video. Then what I'm going to do is take the rest of it down to the next line. I'm going to say ActiveCell.offset 0,1.value equals vidlink getAttribute href. So we'll just stick with the href attribute just for the time being. Really importantly, because of the way this is working, we need to make sure that we move the active cell. So we're going to say ActiveCell.offset, offset 1,0.select. In the previous video, we looked at how we could use cells, row numbers and column indexes to populate the cells. So it's a slightly different approach in this case. We're physically moving down the worksheet. Somewhat less efficient approach, this one actually. It's just less code for me to write at this stage. So if you want the more efficient technique, then go back to the previous video, I guess. This one's just for convenience. We should really do something with the video link here as well. Rather than using the href attribute, we ought to generate the full complete URL just like we did earlier on. So what I might do actually is just declare a new variable or a couple of new variables up towards the top where all of our other variables are. Let's say dim, let's say vid href as string, and dim vid URL as string. And we'll just use exactly the same approach as we've used already a couple of times to generate a fully formed URL. So if I just copy and paste from earlier on the next href and next URL lines, that won't take too long to do. Then scroll back down into the main part. So after we've set the vid link up and we've got the reference to its tag, what we can say here, if I paste those two lines in, is we can say next, sorry, big one, that should be vid href, of course, the one that we've just created. So that would be vid href would be equal to vidlink dot get attribute href, and then vid URL would be equal to wall vid URL, of course, and then mid vid href and in-string vid href. And then rather than putting the href attribute into the cell, we could simply say vid URL. Okay, so that's pretty much all the code written, I think, at that point. Last thing that remains is to give it a quick test. So let's scroll back up to the very top of our code to the first procedure that we wrote, and then we can just execute everything from this get video page procedure. If I just hit the run button, we ought to see a great big long list of different worksheets appearing. And if we switch back into Excel, we'll hopefully find that we get all the correct values in there as well. So a few archived old videos, everything should be there, the names of the videos, the URLs that we've formed, apart from the formatting, of course, the changing column widths and maybe even applying hyperlinks to these cells rather than just having the raw text in there. The important thing I'm looking for, of course, is making sure that the categories where there were more than 20 videos, more than one page, that we've still got all of the videos that we'd expect to see. So that's kind of important for the VBA category, of course, where there were 52 videos in total, getting to be quite a big series at this point. So maybe just for a tiny little bit of tidying up, just a last little bit of frivolity, we could maybe do a little bit of formatting for the column headings, and then maybe also apply hyperlinks to the cells so that we can actually click on them to view the videos. How about that? So one last thing we'll head back into, in fact before we do that, let's just delete all of these worksheets first. So I'm just going to quickly do this by selecting the first sheet with data in it, then hold down the shift key, and the last sheet with data in it. I can click on that as well. And then, once I've done that, I can right-click on any one of those and choose Delete to get rid of them all at the same time. And then head back into the VB editor and scroll all the way down to the very, very bottom just to add a tiny little bit of extra code. I can close down the immediate window at this point just to give myself a little bit more space, and if we find the part where we're just adding in the new worksheet, so we change the value of A1 to the video category name, I'm just going to do a similar thing to range B1, so let's just copy and paste a little bit and say range B1 will make equal to just the literal string video URL. Okay, and then we can do a tiny bit of formatting there as well, I suppose. We could say range A1 and B1 dot interior dot color equals something like, I don't know, let's go for RGB cornflower blue, something like that. And same thing again, I'll just copy and paste that, and let's just change the font color as well. If you're getting bored at this point, do feel free to stop watching. We're not going to do anything more exciting or interesting apart from adding the hyperlinks to the cells. So there's a tiny little bit of formatting there. Maybe we should make the font bold as well. So last little thing, sorry, I can never resist doing this. So let's have the font in bold as well. I should have used a width block for that. I didn't really think that I was going to do quite so much. So font.bold equals true. Okay, scrolling down a bit further then, where we've actually put in the values in the cells, particularly the video URL. What I want to do next is, before I move down to the next row, assign the hyperlink to the cell based on the contents of it. Assigning hyperlinks to cells is relatively straightforward. We can refer to the same cell we've just added the URL to, so that's activecell.offset 0, 1 dot hyperlinks.add. So there's a couple of compulsory parameters. The first thing is the anchor, so the object that the hyperlink belongs to. Well, that's the same object that I'm adding the hyperlink to, so I can just copy and paste activecell.offset 0, 1, followed by another comma, and then I need to pass in the address. So the address is the same as the value of the cell, which is again the same as the video URL, so I could just here reference vid URL. Okay, last little thing. Once I've finished looping through all of the cells for that particular table, so before I go back and then start adding in a new worksheet, what I can do is, at the end of that loop, say range a1.select, just to put myself back up in the top left hand corner of the sheet. Excuse me, I'll spell select properly. And then finally I'm going to say active cell dot current region, so current region refers to the entire table of data that that cell belongs to, and then entire column dot auto fit. So that should just make sure that all the columns become the correct width to display all the data stored in them. So with those few changes, let's have a quick look now running this subroutine again. If I scroll all the way way back up to the top, and then click into the first subroutine. Let's just run the whole thing one more time. We'll see all those worksheets appear again, but this time if I switch back into Excel, once it's all finished, we should see something looking a little bit neater. So that looks a lot better if I just zoom in so you can see that clearly. So there we go, somewhat more long-winded video perhaps than yesterday, and we looked at things in a little bit more detail hopefully. If I were just to click on one of these hyperlinks, hopefully, if they actually appear, there we go. So we should be able to see now if I click on, let's click on yesterday's video, shall we? Scraping web pages just to make sure that's still working. So there we go. Hopefully you've enjoyed that one as much as you enjoyed the previous video. I'm sorry it was so long, but hopefully you got some really useful ideas out of that and you can adapt that again to your own needs. Thanks for sitting through it, thanks for watching, see you next time. If you like what you've seen here, why not head over to the WiseOwl website where you can find loads more free resources, including these videos, some written blogs and tutorials, and even some exercises that you can download to practice your skills. Thanks for watching, see you next time.